Set in the summer of 1995, this is the story of Aiyana Blackhorse, a 27-year-old Apache woman who returns to her grandmother's reservation in Arizona after years of city life following a painful divorce. Seeking healing and connection to her roots, she encounters Koda Windrunner, a precocious 10-year-old Apache boy who lives with his grandfather after losing his parents in a car accident. Koda is wise beyond his years, carrying both the innocence of childhood and the deep spiritual understanding passed down through Apache tradition. When he meets Aiyana by the sacred river where his grandfather taught him to fish, he's immediately drawn to her gentle spirit and genuine smile, the first real happiness he's seen since his parents died. In a moment of pure childhood honesty mixed with ancient soul wisdom, young Koda asks Aiyana the question that will define both their lives. Can I be the father of your children? Her response, gentle, understanding, yet playfully mysterious, sets in motion a love story that will span nearly 2 decades, testing the boundaries between friendship, mentorship, and destined love. This is a story about healing, growing up, cultural identity, and the kind of love that transcends time. A love that waits, that nurtures, and that ultimately transforms 2 broken souls into something beautiful and whole. The morning sun painted the Arizona desert in shades of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the red earth as Aiyana Blackhorse stepped out of her rusty Ford pickup truck. The dust settled around her worn cowboy boots as she breathed in the familiar scent of sage and desert blooms. After 3 years in Phoenix's concrete jungle, the reservation felt like returning to the womb of Mother Earth herself. Grandmother would say the land remembers, she whispered to herself, touching the turquoise pendant that hung around her neck, the last gift from her grandmother before she passed 2 months ago. Aiyana was 27, but felt decades older. Her marriage to David, a white businessman from Scottsdale, had crumbled like autumn leaves, leaving her with nothing but a broken heart and a desperate need to find herself again. The city had tried to polish away her Apache identity, but here, surrounded by the mesas and sacred grounds of her childhood, she could feel her true self awakening. She grabbed her grandmother's old fishing pole from the truck bed and headed toward the river. The same spot where grandmother used to tell her stories about the ancient ones, about love that transcends lifetimes, about how the spirits sometimes send us exactly what we need when we need it most. The path to the river was overgrown with desert grass and prickly pear, but her feet remembered every stone, every turn. As she rounded the bend where the cottonwood trees created a natural cathedral, she stopped short. There, sitting cross-legged on the flat rock that jutted out over the water, was a small Apache boy. His long black hair hung in 2 braids down his back, and he wore a faded red t-shirt and jeans that had seen better days. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, but there was something in the way he sat, perfectly still, watching the water with the patience of an old soul, that made Aiyana pause. The boy turned at the sound of her footsteps, and Aiyana's breath caught in her throat. His eyes were the deepest brown she'd ever seen, like pools of ancient wisdom. But there was a sadness there too, a grief that no child should carry. "You're Aiyana," he said simply, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "My grandfather told me you would come back someday." "And you are?" she asked gently, setting down her fishing pole and approaching slowly, as one might approach a wild deer. "Koda Windrunner," he replied, then added with quiet pride, "I'm Apache." Something in the way he said it, as if he was claiming his identity against a world that might try to take it from him, resonated deep in Aiyana's chest. She smiled for the first time in months, a real smile that reached her eyes. "It's good to meet you, Koda Windrunner. This is my grandmother's fishing spot." "I know," he said, scooting over to make room on the rock. "She used to fish here with my grandfather when they were young. He says she was the most beautiful woman on the reservation." Aiyana felt tears prick her eyes. She was beautiful inside and out. "My grandfather says you have her spirit," Koda continued, studying her face with an intensity that was both endearing and slightly unnerving. He says you've been hurt, but that you're strong like the desert rose. You bloom even in the hardest places. Your grandfather sounds very wise, Aiyana said, settling down beside him on the warm stone. What else does he say? Koda was quiet for a long moment, watching a hawk circle overhead. He says my parents are with the Great Spirit now, and that sometimes when we lose people we love, the Creator sends us new people to love, different kinds of love, but love just the same. The simple honesty in his voice made Aiyana's heart clench. You miss them very much. Every day, he whispered, then looked at her directly. Do you miss your grandmother every day too? Yes, she said softly. Every day, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the river flow past, carrying leaves and small twigs toward some distant destination. A roadrunner darted across the path behind them, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, Aiyana. Koda's voice was smaller now, more like the 10-year-old boy he was. Yes, can I tell you something? Of course. He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. When I first saw you walking down that path, something in my chest got warm, like when grandfather makes hot chocolate on cold mornings, but different. And I heard my mother's voice in the wind, telling me you were special. Aiyana felt a lump forming in her throat. Koda, I know I'm just a kid, he continued, his words tumbling out faster now. And I know you're a grown-up lady, and I know it probably sounds crazy, but he turned to face her fully, his dark eyes shining with unshed tears, and something deeper, something that looked remarkably like love in its purest, most innocent form. Can I be the father of your children? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the desert air like a prayer, like a prophecy, like a promise made by the universe itself. Aiyana stared at this beautiful, broken, wise little boy who had somehow looked into her soul and seen something she'd forgotten was there. Instead of laughing, instead of dismissing him as just a child with a crush, she found herself seeing him, really seeing him. The strength in his small shoulders, the gentleness in his rough hands, the old soul wisdom in his young eyes. She saw the man he would become, noble and proud, and capable of great love. Oh, Koda, she said softly, reaching out to touch his cheek. A single tear rolled down her face, but she was smiling, a smile filled with wonder, and something that felt dangerously close to destiny. You want to know something? She said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her heart. You have the most beautiful spirit I've ever encountered. Any woman would be blessed to have you love her children, to have you as their protector and guide. Koda's face lit up like sunrise over the mesa. Really? Really? She confirmed. Then, with a playfulness that surprised them both, she added, but I think you need to grow up first, don't you? Learn how to be a man worthy of such a sacred responsibility. How long do you think that will take? He asked earnestly. Aiyana pretended to consider this very seriously, tilting her head and looking up at the sky as if consulting the spirits themselves. Well, let's see. You're 10 now. I think 17 years should do it. That will make you 27, old enough to be a father, wise enough to be a partner, strong enough to protect a family. 17 years, Koda repeated solemnly, as if committing the number to his very DNA. And then, can I ask you again? Yes, she whispered, the word escaping before she could stop it. If you still want to ask me in 17 years, if you still feel that warmth in your chest when you see me, if you've grown into the man I can see you're meant to become, then yes, you can ask me again. Koda's smile could have powered the entire reservation. He stuck out his small hand, and Aiyana shook it solemnly, sealing a pact that neither of them fully understood, but both felt in their bones was sacred. It's a promise then, he said. It's a promise, she agreed. As if summoned by the significance of the moment, an eagle soared overhead, its cry echoing across the desert, a sound the Apache people have always known as a blessing from the Creator. Neither Aiyana nor Koda knew that this moment would be the beginning of everything, that 17 years would pass like 17 seasons, each one bringing them closer to a love story that would heal not just their own hearts, but touch everyone who witnessed it. All they knew was that something sacred had just occurred by the river, where Aiyana's grandmother once fished, where the spirits still whispered ancient secrets to those wise enough to listen. The boy and the woman sat by the water until the sun reached its zenith, talking about dreams and loss, about the desert and the sky, about everything and nothing at all. And when Aiyana finally walked back to her truck that evening, she carried with her something she hadn't felt in years, hope. The desert heat shimmered like liquid silver as Aiyana pulled up to the small adobe house where Koda lived with his grandfather. Word traveled fast on the reservation, and she'd learned from the tribal elder, Miss Yazzie at the trading post, that the boy had been asking about her every day since their meeting by the river. "That child's been walking around like he's carrying sunshine in his pocket," Mrs. Yazzie had said with a knowing smile. "Whatever you said to him by that river, it's the first time I've seen him truly happy since the accident." Now, as Aiyana knocked on the weathered wooden door, she could hear voices inside, one deep and gravelly, the other high and excited. The door opened to reveal an elderly Apache man with silver braids and eyes that held the wisdom of 7 decades. This had to be Joseph Windrunner, Koda's grandfather. "You must be Samuel Blackhorse's granddaughter," he said, extending a weathered hand. "I am Joseph. Koda has been talking about nothing but you for weeks." "All good things, I hope," Aiyana replied with a gentle smile. Joseph's eyes twinkled. "He says you're going to be his wife in 17 years. Heat rushed to Aiyana's cheeks, but before she could respond, Koda appeared behind his grandfather, practically bouncing with excitement. He'd clearly been waiting by the window. "Aiyana, you came back." "Grandfather, this is her. This is Aiyana." "Yes, little warrior, I can see that," Joseph chuckled. "Why don't you invite the lady in instead of letting her melt in this heat?" The inside of the house was cool and filled with the scent of sage and fry bread. Traditional Apache weavings hung on the walls alongside family photographs, and Aiyana noticed several pictures of a young couple, clearly Koda's parents. The woman had Koda's same gentle eyes, while the man possessed his strong jawline. "They were beautiful," Aiyana said softly, nodding toward the photos. Joseph's expression grew tender. "Yes, they were. Sarah was a teacher, and Michael worked for the tribal council. They died coming back from a meeting in Phoenix 18 months ago. Drunk driver." "I'm so sorry," Aiyana whispered, watching as Koda's shoulders tensed slightly. Even 3 weeks after their first meeting, she could see the pain was still raw. "The Creator has his reasons," Joseph said philosophically, "and sometimes he sends angels to help us heal." His meaningful look at Aiyana wasn't lost on her. "Grandfather makes the best fry bread on the reservation," Koda interjected, clearly wanting to change the subject. "Want to help us make some? I mean, if you're not too busy with grown-up stuff." Aiyana laughed, a sound that seemed to light up Koda's entire face. "I would love to help make fry bread, but I have to warn you, I'm pretty rusty. My grandmother tried to teach me when I was little, but I was more interested in climbing trees than cooking." "I can teach you," Koda said eagerly. "Grandfather taught me all of Mom's recipes." For the next 2 hours, Aiyana found herself in the warm, flour-dusted kitchen, learning to knead dough under the patient instruction of a 10-year-old boy who took his culinary responsibilities very seriously. Joseph sat at the kitchen table, carving a piece of wood and occasionally offering gentle corrections. "No," Koda said, his small hands covering hers as he guided her kneading technique. "You have to feel when it's ready. The dough will tell you. It gets smooth and soft like—" He paused, thinking. "Like your skin." The innocent comment made Aiyana's breath catch, and she saw Joseph hide a smile behind his carving. "You're a very good teacher, Koda," she managed. "My mom always said teaching is the best way to show love," he replied matter-of-factly, then looked up at her with those impossibly deep brown eyes. "I want to show you lots of love, Aiyana." The simple honesty of it nearly broke her heart. This child, who had lost so much, was offering her the purest kind of affection she'd ever encountered. "And I want to show you love too, sweetheart," she said, the endearment slipping out naturally, "different from the love you'll have with a wife someday, but real love just the same." "What kind of love?" he asked curiously, continuing to work the dough. Aiyana considered this carefully. "The love of deep friendship, the love of someone who believes in you and wants to see you grow into the amazing man you're meant to be. The love of someone who will always be in your corner, cheering you on." Koda nodded solemnly, as if filing this information away for future reference. "Will you teach me things, like how to be the kind of man a woman would want to marry?" Joseph looked up from his carving, his expression unreadable but intense. "What would you like to learn?" Aiyana asked gently. "Everything," Koda said with the earnestness only children possess. "How to make a woman feel safe and happy. How to be strong but gentle. How to keep promises. How to..." He paused, his cheeks reddening slightly. "How to talk to women without feeling like my tongue is tied in knots." Aiyana couldn't help but smile. "Well, you seem to be doing just fine talking to me." "That's different," he said. "You're special. You make me feel brave." The words hit her like a physical force. This beautiful child, with his open heart and old soul, was already showing her a kind of unconditional acceptance she'd never experienced. Not from her ex-husband, not from anyone. "You know what, Koda," she said, making a decision that would change both their lives. "I think we can help each other. You can teach me about healing, about finding my way back to being Apache, about remembering how to trust and hope again. And I can teach you about growing up to be the kind of man who deserves great love." "Really?" His face lit up like the 4th of July. "Really? But it has to be our secret project, okay? Some people might not understand." Koda nodded vigorous, "Like a sacred pact, like the warriors used to make." "Exactly like that." Joseph cleared his throat meaningfully. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "Aiyana would like to join us for dinner regularly. Say every Sunday. A boy needs different kinds of wisdom as he grows, and I am an old man who knows mostly about the old ways. I would love that," Aiyana said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "And maybe," Koda added hopefully, "you could come fishing with us sometimes, and to the tribal gathering, and maybe you could show me how to dance. The grown-up dances, not just the children's ones." Each request was made with such sweet hopefulness that Aiyana found herself nodding to all of them. She was creating a relationship with this child that defied easy categorization. Part mentor, part friend, part something she couldn't name yet. As they sat down to eat the fry bread they'd made together, drizzled with honey and served with Joseph's famous green chili stew, Aiyana realized something remarkable was happening. For the first time since her divorce, she wasn't thinking about what she'd lost. Instead, she was thinking about what she might be gaining. "Aiyana," Koda said around a mouthful of bread. "Yes? Thank you for coming back to see me. I was afraid you might decide I was just a silly kid after all." She reached across the table and squeezed his small hand. "Koda Windrunner, you are many things, but silly is not one of them. You're wise and kind and brave, and I'm honored to be your friend." "For the next 17 years, he asked, hope shining in his eyes. "For the next 17 years, she confirmed. "And beyond." Outside, the desert wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of cooler weather. Inside the small adobe house, 3 people who had all known loss were beginning to understand that sometimes the most unexpected families are the ones that heal us most completely. As Aiyana drove home that evening, the taste of honey still sweet on her lips, she found herself humming an old Apache lullaby her grandmother used to sing. For the first time in months, the future didn't seem like something to fear. Instead, it seemed like something worth waiting for. The autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves and the promise of winter as 12-year-old Koda Windrunner sat on the porch steps of his grandfather's house. carving a piece of cedar with the knife Joseph had given him for his birthday. His hands, no longer quite so small, worked with the patience and precision his grandfather had taught him. Aiyana's truck pulled up the dusty drive right on schedule, every Sunday at 4 p.m. for the past 2 years, as reliable as the sunrise. But today something was different. Even before she stepped out of the vehicle, Koda could sense a heaviness around her, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. "Aiyana," he called out, setting down his carving and jogging over to greet her. At 12 he was taller now, his voice showing the first hints of the changes to come. But his smile was the same radiant sunshine it had always been when he saw her. She smiled back, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hello, sweetheart. What are you making?" "A horse for you," he said proudly, holding up the partially carved figure. "Grandfather says our ancestors believed horses carried messages between the living and the spirits. I thought maybe it could carry my prayers for you." The simple gesture nearly undid her. Over the past 2 years, their Sunday tradition had become the anchor of both their weeks. Koda had grown from a wise but heartbroken 10-year-old into a remarkable young man who seemed to understand her soul in ways that defied explanation. And she had watched him flourish under the steady love she and Joseph provided. But today, everything felt fragile. "Koda, we need to talk," she said gently. "Is your grandfather inside? He's visiting Mrs. Yazzie. Her arthritis is acting up, so he went to bring her some of his special tea." Koda studied her face with the intensity she'd come to know so well. "You're sad about something. Really sad." They settled on the porch swing Joseph had built the previous summer. Koda's long legs, when had he gotten so tall, curled beneath him, Aiyana sitting close enough to feel his warmth, but far enough to maintain the careful boundaries they'd established. "I got a job offer," she said finally. "A good one. In Denver." The words hung in the desert air like a death sentence. Koda went very still, his dark eyes searching her face. "A job offer," he repeated carefully. "The Colorado Indian Health Service needs someone to run their new youth outreach program. It's exactly what I went to school for before I got married. It's a chance to help Native kids across multiple tribes, to make a real difference." "That's wonderful," Koda said quietly, and she could hear him trying so hard to be mature, to be supportive. "You should take it." "Koda, no, really." His voice cracked slightly, betraying his 12-year-old heart, despite his attempts at grown-up composure. "It sounds like something that would make you happy. And isn't that what friends want for each other? Happiness." The word friends landed like a stone in still water, creating ripples neither of them wanted to examine too closely. Because what they'd built over the past 2 years had transcended simple friendship, even as they'd been careful to keep it appropriate. Aiyana had become his confidant, his mentor in all things beyond reservation life. She'd helped him with school projects, taught him to drive illegally on the back roads, listened to his dreams about becoming a veterinarian so he could care for the animals his people had always lived alongside. And Koda had become her healing, his unwavering faith in her, his innocent wisdom, his way of seeing straight to the heart of things. He'd helped her remember who she was beneath the pain of her failed marriage. More than that, he'd helped her believe she was worthy of love again. "How long?" he asked. "How long what? How long will you be gone?" Aiyana's heart clenched. "Koda, it's not a temporary position, it's a career move. I would be starting a new life there." The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of wind chimes and the distant call of a hawk. When Koda finally spoke, his voice was so soft she almost missed it. 15 years left. "What?" "We made a promise," he said, looking directly at her now, and she was struck by how much older his eyes seemed than they had just minutes before. 17 years, you said. It's been 2 years, so there are 15 left. Oh, Koda, are you going to break our promise?" The question wasn't accusatory, just heartbreakingly honest. Aiyana felt tears threatening. How could she explain to this beautiful child that what they'd shared had been healing for her, but that she couldn't base life decisions on a promise made to a 10-year-old boy by a sacred river. How could she make him understand that she cared for him deeply, but that she needed to build a life, a real adult life, with purpose and meaning beyond their Sunday dinners and quiet conversation? But as she looked into his face, no longer quite a child's face, but not yet a man's either, she saw something that stopped her cold. It wasn't just hurt in his eyes. It wasn't even just love. It was absolute, unwavering faith. Faith in her. Faith in their connection. Faith in something larger than both of them, that she was too scared to name. "I don't want to break our promise," she said honestly. "But Koda, I'm 29 years old. I can't put my life on hold for..." He interrupted, and there was a new strength in his voice she'd never heard before. "For the possibility that what we have is real. For the chance that the spirits really did bring us together for a reason." "You're 12, she said gently. "I know how old I am." His chin lifted with stubborn pride. "But I also know how I feel when I'm with you. I know that you're the first person I think about when I wake up and the last person I think about before I sleep. I know that when you're sad, something inside me breaks, and when you smile, I feel like I could move mountains." The words hung between them, too honest and too adult for a 12-year-old, yet spoken with the kind of truth that couldn't be dismissed. "I know you think I'm just a kid with a crush," he continued, "but what if I'm not? What if this is bigger than that? What if we're meant to find each other again and again, in this life and the next, until we get it right?" Aiyana stared at him, this young man-child who spoke like a poet and loved like a warrior. "My grandfather told me something once," Koda said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "He said that some souls are made from the same star, and that no matter how far apart life takes them, they'll always find their way back to each other. He said I would know my star soul when I met her. Koda, I knew the moment I saw you by the river," he said simply. "I've known every day since. And if you need to go to Denver to become who you're meant to be, then go. But don't forget our promise. Don't forget that someone here will be counting the days until you come back." The tears came then, despite her best efforts to hold them back. This child, this beautiful, impossible child, was offering her something no adult ever had. Unconditional love, with no strings attached, no demands for her to be anyone other than exactly who she was. "What if I change?" she asked through her tears. "What if I become someone different in the city? Then I'll love that person too," he said without hesitation, "because she'll still be you." They sat in silence as the sun began to set, painting the desert in shades of gold and purple. Finally Aiyana spoke. "If I go, if I take this job, would you write to me?" Koda's face lit up like dawn breaking. "Every week, every day, if you want. And would you keep growing into the remarkable man I can see you're becoming?" "I promise. And in 15 years if you still..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "I will," he said with absolute certainty. "I'll still feel exactly the same way about you when I'm 27 that I feel right now, maybe more." As Joseph's truck pulled into the driveway, returning from his visit to Miss Yazzie, Aiyana made a decision that would define the next phase of both their lives. "I'll take the job," she said quietly. "But Koda, this isn't goodbye. This is just, see you later." He reached over and took her hand, his still small enough to be covered by hers, but strong and calloused from work and carving. 15 years, he said. 15 years, she agreed. And as they sat there holding hands on the porch swing, watching Joseph's familiar figure approach in the gathering dusk, both of them felt the bittersweet weight of a love that was willing to wait, to grow, to become whatever it was meant to be. The little wooden horse lay forgotten between them on the swing, nearly finished, carrying carved prayers that neither of them dared speak aloud. Aiyana sat at her small kitchen table in her downtown Denver apartment, surrounded by the letters that had become her lifeline over the past 6 months. Each envelope bore the same careful handwriting, each one addressed to Miss Aiyana Blackhorse in the formal style Koda's grandfather had taught him. The latest letter, which had arrived that morning, lay open before her. Dear Aiyana, Grandfather says spring is coming early this year. The desert marigolds are already blooming, and yesterday I saw the first roadrunner of the season. He was sitting on the fence post by our mailbox, almost like he was waiting for your letter too. School is going well. Miss Henderson says I'm reading at a high school level now, and my math scores are the highest in the 8th grade. I've been thinking about what you said about education being a warrior's weapon in the modern world. I want to be armed for battle when I see you again. I finished the wooden horse I was carving for you. Grandfather helped me with the final details. I know I can't send it in a letter, but I've put it on my windowsill where I can see it every night before I sleep. It reminds me that some things are worth waiting for. I hope the city kids you're working with know how lucky they are to have you. I hope you're remembering to take care of yourself too. Grandfather says you always put others first, but that even healers need healing sometimes. 13 years, 11 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days left. I love you, Aiyana. Not just the way a kid loves his favorite teacher, but the way a man loves his missing half. I know you might not believe that yet, but time will prove me right. Your faithful Koda. P.S. I grew 2 inches since Christmas. Grandfather says I'm going to be tall like my father. Aiyana traced the careful letters with her fingertip, smiling despite the ache in her chest. True to his word, Koda had written every week without fail. His letters had chronicled his growth, from a 12-year-old boy into what was clearly becoming a remarkable young man. She reached for her stationery, the same cream-colored paper she'd been using for 6 months, and began her reply. My dear Koda, your letter found me on a difficult day, and as always, your words were exactly what I needed to hear. There's something about the way you see the world that reminds me of all the beauty I sometimes forget exists when I'm surrounded by concrete and car horns. The work here is challenging but rewarding. Last week, I helped a 15-year-old Lakota boy get into a college prep program. He reminded me a little of you, that same quiet strength, that same determination to honor his heritage while embracing the future. I told him about a young Apache man I know who proves every day that you can be both traditional and modern, rooted and growing. I'm proud of your grades, but I'm prouder of the man you're becoming. Your letters show me wisdom that some people never develop, no matter how old they get. Keep reading, keep learning, keep growing into yourself. I miss the desert more than I expect. I miss the silence that speaks louder than any city noise. I miss Sunday dinners with you and your grandfather. I miss watching you carve and listening to your thoughts about everything from horses to philosophy. Most of all, I miss my friend who sees magic in roadrunners and makes promises he intends to keep. The wooden horse sounds beautiful. I can picture it perfectly, sitting on your windowsill like a guardian of dreams. 2 more inches. Your grandfather is right. You're going to be tall and strong like your father. I can't wait to see the man you're becoming. With love and infinite faith in you, Aiyana. P.S. I'm keeping track of the time too. Every day that passes is one day closer to seeing what the future holds for us. As she sealed the envelope, Aiyana reflected on how these weekly letters had become the rhythm of her life. Kodas arrived every Friday, and she responded every Sunday. Their old dinner day. It was a ritual that kept their connection alive across hundreds of miles. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Sarah Martinez, her colleague and the closest thing she had to a friend in Denver. Hey girl, you want to grab dinner tonight? There's this new place downtown. Thanks, but I'm staying in, Aiyana said, glancing at Koda's letter. I have some correspondence to catch up on. Let me guess, another letter from your mystery pen pal on the reservation. Sarah's tone was teasing but curious. You know, in all the months we've been friends, you've never told me anything about this person except that they're important to you. Aiyana hesitated. How could she explain Koda to anyone? How could she tell a sophisticated city woman about a 13-year-old boy who wrote love letters with the soul of a poet and the heart of a warrior? It's complicated, she said finally. Everything good is complicated, Sarah replied. But Aiyana, honey, you've been here 6 months, and you haven't dated anyone, haven't shown interest in anyone, haven't even gone out dancing with us girls. This person back home, are they the reason you're holding yourself apart from life here? The question hit closer to home than Aiyana wanted to admit, because the truth was, no man she'd met in Denver had sparked even the faintest interest. Not the handsome doctor who'd asked her out 3 times. Not the charming lawyer from her building. Not the sweet teacher from the school where she did outreach. None of them had Koda's eyes. "I'm just focused on work right now," she said. Sarah's tone suggested she wasn't buying it. "Well, when you're ready to tell me about this mysterious person who has such a hold on your heart, I'm here to listen." After hanging up, Aiyana walked to her window and looked out at the Denver skyline. It was beautiful in its own way, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky like modern pueblos. But it wasn't home. Home was red earth and endless horizons. Home was the scent of sage and the sound of wind through cottonwood trees. Home was a young man with ancient eyes who carved wooden horses and counted down the days until he could ask her to marry him again. 3 states away, Windrunner House, Arizona. Koda sealed his own letter, his response to Aiyana's response to his last letter, and placed it carefully on his desk. At 13, he was methodical about their correspondence, keeping copies of every letter he sent and storing hers in a wooden box his grandfather had made for him. "Another letter for your lady?" Joseph asked from the doorway. Koda looked up from his desk, where he'd been doing homework by lamplight. His grandfather's expression was knowing but not teasing. "She's not my lady yet," Koda said seriously, "but she will be." Joseph entered the room and sat on the edge of the bed. At 13, Koda was indeed growing tall, his shoulders beginning to broaden, his voice deepening gradually. But his grandfather could still see the boy in him, especially when he talked about Aiyana. "Tell me something, grandson. What will you do if, when the time comes, she says no?" It was a question Joseph had been wanting to ask for months. Watching his grandson pour his young heart into letters, watching him turn down invitations from girls his own age, watching him hold himself apart from typical teenage pursuits because he was convinced his future was already written. Koda considered the question seriously. "She won't say no, but if she does, then I'll ask her why, and I'll work to become whatever she needs me to be, and if she can't love you the way you love her." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Koda's features. Then I'll love her anyway, from a distance if I have to, but I'll never stop believing that we're meant to be together." Joseph studied his grandson's face, so young, yet so determined. "That's a heavy burden to carry, Koda, to pin all your hopes on one person, one outcome." "It's not a burden, grandfather. It's a gift. How many people get to really know, who they're meant to love? Most people spend their whole lives searching for what I found when I was 10 years old." The conviction in his voice was absolute, and Joseph felt both pride and concern for this remarkable boy who loved with the intensity of a man, but carried it in a child's heart. "Your parents loved like that," Joseph said quietly. "Your father knew the moment he met your mother that she was his destiny. Sometimes I look at you and see him all over again. Do you think that's bad?" "No, grandson. I think it's beautiful and terrifying." Joseph stood and ruffled Koda's dark hair. "Just remember, even destined love requires patience, wisdom, and the humility to let the other person choose freely." After his grandfather left, Koda picked up his pen and began writing another letter, one he wouldn't send for years if ever. "Dear Aiyana, sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if I'm crazy to love you the way I do. I wonder if other 13-year-old boys feel like their chests might explode from missing someone. I wonder if it's normal to dream about a woman who's hundreds of miles away and wake up feeling like my heart has been torn in half. But then I remember the way you looked at me by the river that first day, like you saw something in me that even I didn't know was there. I remember the promises we made and the way you've kept them, even from so far away. I'm growing up as fast as I can, Aiyana." Every day I try to become more worthy of the love you might give me someday. I study hard because you value intelligence. I help my grandfather because you respect kindness. I practice the old traditions because you taught me that knowing where we come from is the only way to know where we're going. 13 years and 10 months left. I can wait. I would wait forever if I had to, but I really hope I don't have to. Your Koda. He folded the letter and placed it in his private journal, next to dozens of others like it. Letters full of feelings too intense for a boy his age, thoughts too deep for someone who hadn't even started high school yet. Outside his window, the wooden horse caught the moonlight, its carved mane flowing like it was running across the desert toward some distant destination, toward home. The graduation ceremony at Window Rock High School was held outdoors under a blazing Arizona sun, with the sacred red rocks of the reservation serving as a natural amphitheater. 18-year-old Koda Windrunner sat with his fellow graduates, his long black hair braided with traditional beads, wearing his cap and gown over a turquoise shirt that brought out the depth of his dark eyes. In the audience, Joseph Windrunner beamed with pride, his weathered hands clutching a camera and a tissue for the tears he refused to admit were threatening. Beside him sat Miss Yazi and several other tribal elders who had watched Koda grow from a broken 10-year-old into the remarkable young man before them. But there was one empty seat in their row, a seat Joseph had saved just in case, though he knew it would remain unfilled. Aiyana was 3 days into a crucial funding presentation in Washington, D.C., fighting for resources that would help Native youth across 7 states. Koda had insisted she not change her plans, had written her a letter saying that her work was too important to sacrifice for a ceremony. But Joseph could see the careful way his grandson scanned the crowd anyway, hope and disappointment warring in his expression. As the valedictorian, Koda was called to the podium to deliver the closing address. He looked out over the sea of faces, family members, friends, teachers, who had watched these students grow up. His speech had been written and rewritten a dozen times, but as he stood there, he set aside his prepared remarks and spoke from his heart. 7 years ago, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the desert air. I was a broken kid who thought the world had nothing left to offer. I had lost my parents, lost my faith in the future, lost my belief that good things could happen to people like me. The crowd was completely silent, drawn in by the quiet intensity of his words. But sometimes, he continued, the Creator sends us exactly what we need when we need it most. Sometimes it comes in the form of a grandfather who teaches us that strength comes from our roots. Sometimes it's teachers who believe in us, even when we don't believe in ourselves. And sometimes, his voice caught slightly, and he paused to gather himself. Sometimes it comes in the form of someone who sees not just who we are, but who we could become. Someone who plants seeds of possibility in our hearts, and then trusts us to nurture them into reality. In the audience, Joseph's eyes filled with tears as he understood exactly who his grandson was talking about. Today we graduate not just with diplomas, but with the responsibility to carry forward the dreams that others have invested in us. We graduate with the knowledge that love, real love, doesn't just accept us as we are. It challenges us to become our best selves. Koda's eyes found his grandfather in the crowd, and his smile was radiant. To my classmates, I say this: the future belongs to those brave enough to wait for what they truly want, strong enough to work for what they truly need, and wise enough to recognize that the best things in life are worth any sacrifice. As he walked back to his seat amid thunderous applause, Koda felt a familiar pang of longing. 7 years. 7 years since Aiyana had left for Denver, and their weekly letters had become the heartbeat of his existence. He was no longer the 12-year-old boy who had watched her drive away, but the core of who he was, the part that loved her with unwavering certainty, had never changed. If anything, it had grown stronger. That evening, Windrunner House. The graduation party was small but joyful, with traditional foods, and the soft sound of Apache flute music filling the desert air. As the sun set and the guests began to drift away, Koda found himself sitting on the familiar porch swing with his grandfather, both of them holding cups of Joseph's special ceremonial tea. "Your parents would be so proud," Joseph said quietly. "Valedictorian, full scholarship to Arizona State, accepted into their pre-veterinary program. You've honored their memory and your own dreams. I couldn't have done it without you, grandfather. Or without—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. "She sent something," Joseph said, reaching into his shirt pocket and pulling out an envelope. "It came this morning, marked for graduation day." Koda's hands trembled slightly as he opened the familiar cream-colored stationery. After 7 years of weekly letters, he could recognize Aiyana's handwriting from across a room. "My dearest Koda, by the time you read this, you'll be a high school graduate, and I'll be sitting in some stuffy government building, trying to convince politicians that native youth deserve better resources. I would rather be there with you, watching you walk across that stage. But I know you understand that sometimes our individual moments of joy must be sacrificed for the greater good of our people. I am so incredibly proud of you. When I left 7 years ago, I saw potential in a 12-year-old boy. Today, through your letters, I see the reality of an exceptional young man who has every hope I ever had for him. Your grades, your character, your unwavering commitment to both your heritage and your future. You have become everything I believed you could be and more. You have kept every promise you made to me, shown me growth and wisdom that astounds me with every letter. Enclosed, you'll find something I've been saving for this day. I hope it serves as a reminder that some promises are worth, no matter how long they take to fulfill. 9 years, 7 months, 2 weeks left. But who's counting? With love, pride, and anticipation, Aiyana. P.S. I hope the wooden horse is still keeping watch on your windowsill. Some guardians are meant to be eternal. Inside the envelope was a small leather pouch, and inside that was a silver ring, inlaid with turquoise, simple, beautiful, and unmistakably Apache in its design. "It was your grandmother's," Joseph said softly, seeing Koda's expression. "She gave it to Aiyana before she died, told her to save it for someone special." Koda slipped the ring onto his right hand, where it fit perfectly. "She's been carrying this for 7 years? Apparently so." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the desert and the distant sound of celebration still drifting from other homes across the reservation. "Grandfather," Koda said finally, "what if I'm making a mistake? What if I'm wasting my youth, waiting for something that might never happen?" It was the first time in years that Joseph had heard doubt in his grandson's voice, and it both worried and relieved him. Doubt meant Koda was still human, still capable of questioning himself. "Tell me something," Joseph said. "In all these years, have you ever met another woman who made you feel even a fraction of what Aiyana makes you feel?" Koda considered this. There had been girls, pretty, intelligent girls, who had shown interest. Jessica Crow Feather had asked him to prom twice. Maria Santos had kissed him at the inner dance, and he'd felt nothing. Pleasant, but nothing like the fire that ran through his veins when he simply thought about Aiyana. "No," he said honestly. "Never." "Then you have your answer. But what if she doesn't feel the same way when the time comes? What if 7 years of distance has changed everything?" Joseph reached over and squeezed his grandson's shoulder. "Then you'll know you gave everything to something you believed in. There's no shame in that, Koda. The shame would be in giving up before you know for certain." Meanwhile, in a hotel room in Washington, D.C., Aiyana sat on the edge of her hotel bed, staring at her cell phone. She'd just gotten off a call with Miss Yazzie, who had given her a detailed account of Koda's graduation speech, his academic achievements, and how handsome he'd looked in his cap and gown. "That boy spoke about you, you know," Mrs. Yazzie had said with characteristic directness. "Didn't mention you by name, but everyone knew. He talked about someone who believed in his potential, who planted seeds of possibility. Child, that boy loves you with his whole soul." Now alone in the sterile hotel room, Aiyana felt the weight of that love pressing against her chest. Koda was 18 now, no longer the child she'd left behind. According to Mrs. Yaz's description, he'd grown tall and strong, his features settling into the mature handsomeness she'd always known they would. 9 years left on their promise. 9 years felt like forever, and no time at all. She pulled out her laptop and began typing an email to her supervisor, requesting a week of personal leave. For the first time in 7 years, she was going to break her own rule about maintaining distance. She was going home. Back on the reservation, Koda lay in his childhood bed, but sleep wouldn't come. He kept staring at the ring on his finger, turning it slowly and thinking about the woman who had carried it for 7 years, waiting for the right moment to give it to him. Tomorrow he would start his summer job at the veterinary clinic in Flagstaff. In the fall he would begin college. His life was moving forward exactly as planned, each step bringing him closer to becoming the man Aiyana had always believed he could be. But tonight, on the night of his graduation, he allowed himself to imagine a different scenario. He imagined Aiyana in the audience, her smile bright with pride. He imagined her waiting for him after the ceremony, her arms open for the embrace he'd been dreaming about for 7 years. He imagined being old enough, finally, to tell her he loved her not as a boy loves his mentor, but as a man loves his destiny. 9 years left. He could wait 9 more years. He could wait forever if he had to. But as he finally drifted off to sleep, the ring warm on his finger and the wooden horse standing sentinel on his windowsill, Koda whispered a prayer to his ancestors. Let her come home soon, just for a visit, just so I can show her who I've become. In the vast silence of the desert night, the wind carried his prayer toward the stars, where some believed the spirits dwelled, and where all true love stories were written long before the lovers ever met. Koda was under the hood of his grandfather's old pickup truck, his hands black with grease and sweat beading on his forehead in the desert heat, when he heard the sound that made his heart stop. The familiar rumble of Aiyana's Ford pulling up the dusty drive. For a moment he thought he was hallucinating. 7 years of longing could do that to a person, make you hear things, see things that weren't really there. But when he looked up, wiping his hands on an old rag, there she was. Aiyana stepped out of the truck, and Koda felt the earth shift beneath his feet. She was 34 now, and the years had only made her more beautiful. Her long black hair was shorter, falling just past her shoulders, and she wore a simple sundress that made her look both professional and effortlessly elegant. But it was her eyes that held him captive. Those same warm, intelligent eyes that had seen something special in a broken 10-year-old boy by a sacred river. "Hello, Koda," she said softly, and her voice was exactly as he remembered it. Gentle, musical, home. "Aiyana." He set down the rag, acutely aware that he was covered in grease, and probably looked nothing like the impressive young man he'd hoped to be when she saw him again. "I'm here," she confirmed, and there was something in her expression, a mixture of nervousness and wonder, that made his chest tight with hope. They stood there for a moment 20 feet apart, both of them trying to reconcile memory with reality. The boy she'd left behind had become a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with the strong hands of someone who worked with them, and the same impossibly deep brown eyes that had captured her heart when he was 10. "You grew up," she said, and there was amazement in her voice. "You told me to," he replied with a smile that was pure sunshine. The same radiant expression she remembered, but now framed by mature features that took her breath away. Before either of them could say anything else, Joseph appeared on the porch, drawn by the sound of voice. "Aiyana," he said warmly, as if she'd seen him last week instead of 7 years ago. "Perfect timing. I just made a fresh pot of coffee." The next hour passed in a blur of catching up, of filling in details that letters couldn't quite capture. They sat around the familiar kitchen table, and Aiyana marveled at how Koda had learned to navigate adult conversation while still maintaining the essential sweetness that had always defined him. He told her about his plans for veterinary school, about his summer job at the clinic in Flagstaff, about the scholarship that would allow him to pursue his dreams without burdening his grandfather with debt. She shared stories about her work in Denver, about the program she'd developed, about the native youth whose lives had been changed by the resources she'd fought to secure. But underneath the polite conversation, there was an electric current neither of them could ignore. Every time their eyes met, every accidental brush of fingers when reaching for the coffee pot, every shared laugh created sparks that seemed to illuminate the room. "I should let you get cleaned up," Aiyana said finally, noticing that Koda was still in his work clothes. "I didn't mean to interrupt your day." "You're not interrupting anything," Koda said quickly. "I was just fixing grandfather's truck. It can wait." "How long are you staying?" Joseph asked, and there was hope in his voice too. "A week," Aiyana said. "I took some time off to see how things have changed." "A week," Koda repeated, and she could hear him calculating, planning, hoping. "Why don't you go get cleaned up?" Joseph suggested to his grandson, "and then maybe you could show Aiyana around. Let her see how the reservation has grown. What's new since she's been gone?" It was clearly a setup, and all three of them knew it, but nobody objected. 30 minutes later, Koda emerged from the house transformed. Gone were the grease-stained work clothes, replaced by clean jeans and a dark blue shirt that brought out his eyes. His hair was still damp from the shower, and he smelled like soap and something essentially masculine that made Aiyana's pulse quicken. "Ready for the grand tour?" he asked, jingling his truck keys. As they drove through the reservation, Koda pointed out changes, new houses, a community center that hadn't existed when she left, improvements to the school. But mostly, they talked about everything, and nothing, the way they always had in their letters, but with the added dimension of physical presence. "Pull over here," Aiyana said as they approached the river. "I want to see our spot." "Our spot." The words hung in the air between them as Koda parked the truck and they walked down the familiar path to the sacred place where their story had begun. The cottonwood trees were taller, the rock worn smoother by years of weather, but the essential magic of the place remained unchanged. They sat on the same flat stone where a 10-year-old boy had asked a question that would define both their lives. "Do you ever regret it?" Aiyana asked quietly, watching the water flow past. "The promise we made, all the years of waiting." Koda was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "Do you regret learning to read because it took time away from playing? Do you regret going to college because it meant 4 years of studying instead of partying? That's not the same thing, isn't it?" He turned to face her fully. "You taught me that anything worth having is worth working for, worth waiting for. You've been my motivation for everything good I've accomplished. My grades, my character, my dreams, they're all tied to becoming worthy of the love you might give me someday." "Koda," she began, but he held up a gentle hand. "I'm not asking for anything right now," he said. "I know I'm still young. I know you're still not sure. But no, I don't regret a single day of loving you, even if it means 8 more years of uncertainty. 8 more years." The number hit Aiyana like a physical blow. When she'd made that promise to a 10-year-old boy, 17 years had seemed like forever, like something safely in the distant future. Now, looking at this remarkable young man, who loved her with such unwavering devotion, 8 years felt both like an eternity and no time at all. "What if," she started, then stopped herself. "What if what? What if the promise was arbitrary? What if 17 years was just something I said because it sounded like a long time to a child?" Koda studied her face carefully. "Are you asking me to release you from the promise?" The question hung between them like a bridge she could either cross or burn. She looked into his eyes, no longer a child's eyes, but the eyes of a man who had loved her faithfully for 8 years and was prepared to love her for 8 more. "I'm asking," she said slowly, "what you would do if I said the waiting didn't have to be that long." The silence that followed was filled with the sound of running water and the distant cry of a hawk. Koda's hand moved slowly toward hers, stopping just short of touching. "I would ask you to be very sure," he said quietly, "because I've been preparing my whole life for the moment when you might love me back. I don't want you to feel pressured or obligated. I want you to choose me because you can't imagine choosing anyone else. And if I'm not there yet, if I need more time to be sure, then I'll wait, he said simply. However long it takes. Aiyana looked at this young man who spoke like a poet and loved like a warrior, who had spent 8 years becoming exactly the person she'd always believed he could be. She thought about the empty apartments she'd lived in, the men she'd dated, who had never made her feel a fraction of what she felt sitting here beside Koda. She thought about the wooden horse on his windowsill, about 7 years of letters that had been the highlight of her weeks, about the way her heart had raced when she'd seen him standing by that truck, covered in grease and beautiful beyond words. "Koda," she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper, "what if I told you that I've been counting the days too?" His breath caught, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw tears in his eyes. "I would ask you what that means," he said. She reached out and took his hand, the hand that wore her grandmother's ring, the hand that had written her hundreds of letters, the hand that had grown from a child's small fingers into a man's strong grip. "It means," she said, "that maybe some promises are meant to be kept early." The kiss that followed was soft and sweet, and filled with 8 years of longing. It was a first kiss and a homecoming, a question and an answer, a promise fulfilled and a new promise beginning. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. 8 years, Koda whispered against her forehead. "I've been imagining this moment for 8 years. Was it worth the wait?" she asked. "It was worth everything," he replied, and kissed her, again under the desert sky, in the sacred place where their love story had begun, and where, finally, it was ready to bloom. The days that followed were like stepping into a dream. Aiyana hadn't dared to believe could be real. She'd rented a small cabin at the trading post, needing space to process the magnitude of what was happening between them. But every waking moment was spent with Koda. He took her hiking through canyons she'd forgotten existed, showing her petroglyphs left by ancestors whose stories were carved into stone. They spent an afternoon at the veterinary clinic where he worked, and Aiyana watched in amazement as this young man, who had once been a broken child, gently treated a wounded hawk, his hands sure and compassionate. "Martinez says I have natural instincts," Koda said as he carefully bandaged the bird's wing. "But I think it's just that I understand what it feels like to be hurt and need healing." The simple honesty of the statement made Aiyana's heart clench. This was what she'd fallen in love with. Not just the man he'd become, but the soul that had always existed within him. On their 3rd evening together, they attended a tribal gathering, where traditional dances were performed under a canopy of desert stars. Aiyana wore a traditional Apache dress that had belonged to her grandmother, and Koda couldn't take his eyes off her. "Dance with me," he said as the drum circle began a slow, ancient rhythm. "I'm out of practice," she protested, but he was already leading her toward the circle of dancers. "I'll remind you," he said, and proceeded to guide her through the steps with a grace that spoke of years of practice and deep cultural connection. As they moved together in the flickering firelight, surrounded by the voices of their people singing songs that had been sung for generations, Aiyana felt something shift deep inside her chest. This wasn't just attraction or nostalgia or the fulfillment of a childhood promise. This was love, real, adult, overwhelming love for the remarkable man Koda had become. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly, as the dance ended and they walked back toward his truck. "I'm thinking," she said carefully, "that I need to tell you something important." They drove to a hilltop that overlooked the entire reservation, the lights of scattered houses twinkling like earthbound stars. Koda spread a blanket in the truck bed, and they lay back to look up at the vast Arizona sky. "When I left 8 years ago," Aiyana began, "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought the promise we made was a sweet fantasy that would fade as you grew up and discovered other interests, other people. But it didn't fade," Koda said quietly. "No, it did. But Koda, I need you to understand something. These feelings I'm having, they're not based on the promise we made. They're not even based on the boy you were when I left." She turned on her side to face him, her hand resting on his chest where she could feel his heart beating steady and strong. "I'm falling in love with the man you are right now, the man who treats wounded animals with infinite patience, the man who speaks 3 languages and graduated valedictorian and still helps his grandfather fix trucks, the man who can dance traditional Apache dances and quote Shakespeare and make me laugh until my stomach hurts." Koda's eyes shone in the starlight. "Aiyana, I need you to know that if we take this step, if we move beyond friendship into something more, it's not because I feel obligated by an old promise. It's because I can't imagine my life without you in it." "What are you saying?" She took a deep breath, gathering courage for the words that would change everything. "I'm saying that maybe I've been counting down the years too, waiting for you to become the man I somehow knew you'd be. I'm saying that this week has shown me something I was too scared to admit before, which is that I love you, Koda Windrunner. Not as a mentor loves a student, not as an adult loves a child, but as a woman loves a man who sees straight into her soul and loves what he finds there." The silence that followed was filled with the weight of 8 years of longing, finally finding its voice. When Koda spoke, his words were thick with emotion. "I never dared hope you'd say that. Even in my wildest dreams I thought maybe someday you might care for me. But love, she confirmed, and kissed him under the canopy of stars their ancestors had used to navigate both the desert and the mysteries of the heart. The next morning they told Joseph together, sitting around the same kitchen table where they'd shared hundreds of conversations over the years. "Grandfather," Koda began, his hand clasped firmly in Aiyana's, "we wanted you to know that we've decided not to wait 8 more years." Joseph looked at their joined hands, at the way they sat close enough to touch, but still maintained a respectful distance, at the quiet joy radiating from both their faces. "And what does that mean exactly?" he asked, though his smile suggested he already knew. "It means," Aiyana said, "that we're going to start building a life together. Slowly, carefully, with respect for how young Koda still is and how much growing we both still have to do. But together." "What about Denver?" Joseph asked. "I'm going to finish out my contract," Aiyana explained. "1 more year while Koda starts college. We'll spend holidays and summers together, and then when my commitment is complete, I'll come home for good." "Home," Koda repeated, and the words sounded like a prayer. Joseph studied them both for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your parents would be proud," he told Koda. "They loved like this, with their whole hearts, against all odds. And your grandmother," he said to Aiyana, "she would say the spirits brought you together for a reason." "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Aiyana asked, suddenly needing the approval of this wise man who had guided them both. "I think," Joseph said carefully, "that love this pure, this patient, this tested by time and distance, is a gift that should not be wasted. I think the Creator has a plan for you both, and I think you're brave enough to follow it wherever it leads." On their last evening together, Koda took Aiyana to the workshop behind the house where he'd been carving for years. The small building was filled with beautiful pieces, horses, eagles, traditional figures that spoke of skill developed over years of practice. But in the center of the workspace, covered by a soft cloth, was something special. "I've been working on this for 3 years, he said, carefully removing the covering to reveal a carved wooden jewelry box of extraordinary beauty. The lid was inlaid with turquoise in traditional Apache patterns, and every surface was covered with intricate designs that told the story of their people. "Koda, it's breathtaking," Aiyana whispered, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Open it," he said softly. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a pair of earrings that perfectly matched the ring she'd given him. Silver and turquoise worked in the same traditional style. "I had them made by Mrs. Yazzy's son. He's a silversmith in Santa Fe. They're meant to go with grandmother's ring." "They're perfect," she said, putting them on immediately. "But Koda, this box, you made this yourself. Every inch of it. I wanted to give you something that came from my hands, something that showed you how I've spent these years of waiting, learning, growing, creating something beautiful enough to hold the treasures of our future." Aiyana traced the carved patterns with wonder. Each design told part of their story: a river, a horse, stars, eagles, symbols of love and time and patience rewarded. "Will you keep it for me?" she asked. "Until I come home for good? What will you put in it?" She smiled and reached into her purse, pulling out every letter he'd ever written to her, hundreds of them, carefully preserved and tied with a ribbon. "Our beginnings," she said, "the words that kept us connected across all those miles and years." As she placed the letters in the beautiful box, both of them felt the weight of the moment. This was more than a gift exchange. It was a promise being fulfilled, a future being planned, a love story reaching its first real happy ending. "1 year," Koda said as they closed the lid together. "1 year," Aiyana agreed, "and then forever." The next morning, as Aiyana loaded her truck for the drive back to Denver, the entire reservation seemed to be holding its breath. Word had spread about the love story that had been unfolding quietly for 8 years, and many people had gathered to see her off. But the goodbye between Aiyana and Koda was private, just the two of them by the truck as the sun painted the desert in shades of gold and promise. "I love you," she said, the words still new enough to make them both smile. "I love you too," he replied. "Drive safely. Write to me every day. Don't forget that someone here is counting the minutes until you come home." "I'll never forget," she promised, and kissed him one more time before climbing into the truck. As she drove away, Koda stood in the dusty road waving until her truck disappeared over the horizon. But this time, the goodbye didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of the rest of their lives. The desert was painted in the soft pastels of dawn as Aiyana's truck, loaded with everything she owned, crested the hill overlooking the reservation. Her heart hammered against her ribs as familiar landmarks came into view. The trading post, the community center, the winding road that led to the Windrunner house where her future waited. She was coming home for good. The past year had been the longest and shortest of her life. Daily phone calls had replaced weekly letters, and Koda had visited Denver twice, once for Christmas, once for spring break. Each reunion had been sweeter than the last, each goodbye more difficult to bear. But they had used the time wisely, learning to navigate a long-distance relationship, growing into the people they needed to be for each other. Now 19, Koda had completed his first year of college with perfect grades while working part-time at the veterinary clinic. His letters had chronicled not just his academic success, but his emotional growth. The way loving Aiyana and being loved by her had given him confidence, purpose, and an unshakable faith in the future. Aiyana had finished her contract in Denver by implementing programs that would serve Native youth for decades to come. But more importantly, she had finally, completely healed from the wounds of her past. Koda's unwavering love had taught her that she was worthy of devotion, that her heart was safe in the hands of someone who had proven his commitment across 9 years of waiting. As she pulled into the familiar driveway, she saw them both waiting on the porch. Joseph, now 75 but still strong, and Koda, who had grown even taller in the months since she'd seen him, his shoulders broader, his presence more commanding. He was a man Nav, in every sense of the word. But when he saw her truck, he ran down the steps like the boy he'd once been, his face lit with the same radiant joy she remembered from that first day by the river. "You're home," he said as she stepped out of the truck, and the words held 9 years of longing, 1 year of separation, and infinite gratitude for this moment finally arriving. "I'm home," she confirmed, and fell into his arms as if she'd never left. They held each other in the morning light, both of them crying and laughing at the same time, while Joseph watched from the porch, with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. 2 weeks later, "Are you nervous?" Aiyana asked, as they stood together at the edge of the sacred river where their story had begun. It was sunset, and the desert was painted in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to set the world on fire. "Terrified," Koda admitted with a laugh. What if I mess up the words? What if I trip? What if you just speak from your heart? She interrupted gently. The way you always have. He took her hands in his, those strong, gentle hands that had written her hundreds of letters, that had carved beautiful things from wood, that had healed wounded animals, and were now trembling with the magnitude of this moment. Aiyana Blackhorse, he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. 9 years ago, I was a broken 10-year-old boy who thought the world had nothing left to offer. Then you walked into my life, and everything changed. She smiled through her tears, remembering that day, that first impossible question. You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. You believed in me when I didn't believe in anything. You loved me enough to let me grow up, to become worthy of the gift you were offering. He dropped to one knee then, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a ring unlike anything she'd ever seen, silver and turquoise worked in traditional Apache patterns, but with an inscription in their native language that made her gasp. My heart walks with yours, she whispered, reading the ancient words of love. For 9 years my heart has walked with yours, Koda said, his voice thick with emotion. Through letters and phone calls, through visits and separations, through growing up and growing into ourselves, I have loved you every day of those 9 years, and I want to love you for all the days that remain to us. The tears were flowing freely now for both of them. So I'm asking you again, Aiyana, the same question I asked when I was 10 years old, but now I'm old enough to understand what it means. He looked up at her with those impossibly deep brown eyes that had seen straight into her soul from the very beginning. Will you marry me? Will you let me be the father of your children? Will you build a life with me here, in this sacred place where we first found each other? The silence that followed was filled with the sound of running water, the distant call of an eagle, and the beating of 2 hearts that had been waiting 9 years for this moment. Yes, Aiyana whispered. Then louder, yes, Koda Windrunner, yes to all of it, yes to everything. The ring slipped onto her finger like it had been made for her, which, in every way that mattered, it had. And when Koda stood to kiss her, the desert around them seemed to exhale with satisfaction, as if the land itself had been holding its breath, waiting for this love story to reach its rightful conclusion. 6 months later, January 2004, the wedding was held in winter, when the desert was painted in subtle browns and silvers, when the air was crisp and clear, and the sky seemed to stretch forever. Traditional Apache customs blended seamlessly with personal touches that told the story of their unique love. Aiyana wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered to fit her perfectly, with the turquoise jewelry Koda had given her over the years, creating a constellation of blue-green stars against the white fabric. Koda wore traditional Apache wedding attire that Joseph had helped him make, his long hair braided with beads that had belonged to his father. The ceremony was conducted by a tribal elder who had known both their families for generations, who spoke of love that transcends time, of souls that find each other across lifetimes, of the sacred responsibility of marriage within Apache tradition. But it was the moment when they exchanged personal vows that everyone would remember. Aiyana, Koda said, his hands steady now, his voice clear and strong. You taught me that love is not something you fall into, but something you grow into. You showed me that the best things in life are worth waiting for, worth working for, worth believing in even when others doubt. He paused, looking out at the gathered crowd, Joseph beaming with pride, Miss Yazzie dabbing at her eyes, friends and family who had watched this love story unfold over nearly a decade. 9 years ago, you told a little boy that he needed to grow up before he could love someone the way a woman deserves to be loved. Today, I stand before you as a man who has done exactly that. I have spent every day of these 9 years becoming worthy of you, and I will spend every day of the rest of our lives proving that your faith in me was not misplaced. When Aiyana spoke, her voice carried clearly across the desert air. Koda, when I met you, I was broken in ways I didn't even understand. You healed me not with grand gestures, but with consistent, patient, unwavering love. You showed me what it means to be cherished, to be seen, to be valued for exactly who I am. She looked into his eyes, those eyes that had held so much pain at 10, so much hope at 12, so much love at 18, and so much joy now at 19. You asked me to wait 17 years, but you never asked me to wait without purpose. Every year, every month, every day of waiting has been a gift. Time for both of us to become the people we needed to be for each other. Today, I'm not just marrying the boy who stole my heart by a sacred river. I'm marrying my best friend, my partner, my equal, the father of the children we'll raise together. The kiss that sealed their marriage was witnessed by 200 people, but it felt as intimate as if they were alone by the river where it all began. 5 years later, summer 2009, Aiyana sat on the familiar porch swing, watching her husband chase their 3-year-old daughter, Aiyana, around the yard, while their infant son, Michael, named for Koda's father, slept peacefully in her arms. At 24, Koda had graduated from veterinary school and opened his own practice on the reservation, serving both domestic animals and the wildlife he'd always loved. Joseph, now 81, sat beside her, carving a toy horse for his great-granddaughter with hands that were still steady despite his age. "Happy?" he asked, though the answer was written all over her face. "Perfectly," she replied, watching as Koda caught little Aiyana and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. That evening, after the children were asleep and Joseph had retired to his room, Aiyana and Koda sat together on their bed, looking through the wooden jewelry box that now held not just letters, but photographs, ticket stubs from their first official date, pressed flowers from their wedding bouquet, and tiny mementos from 14 years of loving each other. "Do you ever think about that day by the river?" Koda asked, his arm around her as she leaned against his chest. "Every day," she said softly. "Do you ever regret asking the question, all those years of waiting?" "Never," he said without hesitation. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think we were meant to find each other exactly when we did. I think I needed to be 10, and you needed to be 27. I needed to grow up loving you, and you needed to learn to trust love again. We both needed those years to become who we were meant to be." Aiyana tilted her head to look at him. Even after all these years, she sometimes couldn't believe this remarkable man was hers. The little Apache boy who asked if he could be the father of my children, and the woman who was wise enough to say, "Come back in 17 years, he replied, kissing the top of her head. 14 years, she corrected. "We managed it in 14 years. We managed it perfectly," he said. Outside their window, the desert wind whispered through the sage, carrying with it the scent of home and the promise of all the tomorrows they would share. The wooden horse that had stood guard on Koda's windowsill for so many years now sat on their daughter's dresser, watching over a new generation of dreams. In the distance, an eagle cried out in the darkness, and somewhere in the vast silence of the desert night, the spirits of their ancestors smiled down on a love story that had proven that some promises are worth keeping, some hearts are worth waiting for, and some loves are truly meant to last forever. "I love you, Aiyana Windrunner," Koda whispered into the darkness. "I love you too, my patient warrior," she whispered back. And in the sacred silence that followed, both of them felt the profound gratitude that comes from a dream fulfilled, a promise kept, and a love that had grown from the innocent question of a child into the unshakable foundation of a life built together. The little Apache boy had asked if he could be the father of her children. She had smiled and said to return in 17 years. Now, as they held each other in the darkness of their shared home, surrounded by the children they had created together, and the love they had nurtured across 14 years of faith and patience, they both knew that some stories are worth the wait, some loves are worth everything.